Hey everyone, I'm Dana. Welcome to one of my gardens in my yard. I'm a resident here in Pierce County and specifically in Tacoma in the Hilltop neighborhood. I've been working with Harvest Pierce County for a few years now, both with sharing the wealth of my garden, but also sharing seeds that we were able to distribute around all of Pierce County over the last few years. So I've had the joy of being not only an avid gardener in my off time, but I actually have an undergraduate degree in agriculture and a master's degree in bioagricultural sciences and pest management. That's just kind of a fancy farming process. I also did a specification in weed control. So I'm actually the Noxious Weed Control Coordinator too. So I get to deal with bad plants, but I get to actually work with Harvest Pierce County in things that fill my garden with joy and hope and love that I get to share with other folks. So here in my garden, we've got a lot of different things. I often refer to myself as a messy gardener. I don't necessarily plant in rows because I think nature doesn't really plant in rows. So I end up tossing in a whole bunch of different seeds. And when they come up, I never know what I'm going to get sometimes. And sometimes I do get some cross-pollination. So I get some pretty funky vegetables sometimes. The joy of what I've been able to do for the last couple of years with this organization has been to not only put seeds in, but as soon as those plants start to senesce and die back and set seed, I'm able to harvest those seeds and share them with others. I think one of the really vital pieces that we have in our community is that we've got an opportunity to actually plant and grow our own food. We've been told for decades that we don't really have the skill set to do that, but I think it's in our bones. I think it's in our soul. I know right now that I'm sitting also on the lands of the Puyallup people. And I know that there's an energy and a joy and a love that comes through this soil that when you touch it, you can feel the change. Here in Pierce County, we have a great organization that not only can you get seeds to plant, but you can also give back. I think it's super important when we're gardening to not just think about ourselves, but to think about the greater community, the community who's maybe going to eat the vegetables that you grew, and also maybe even use some of the seeds that you saved and that you are sharing with others. So what is seed saving? Well, it's literally just that. You save the seeds that your plants produce. Oftentimes when we eat vegetables, we're actually eating the seeds. So it's important to think about, can you put one or two of those plants aside that at the end of the season, you can go out and harvest those fruits or vegetables specifically for seed capturing. I make it sound like it's like going out and hunting for the seeds, but you kind of want to. You want to go find what looks the best in your garden, what maybe actually has shown some resistance to various insects or other things. My biggest predator in my garden is actually my dog. The dog likes to go and chew on a bunch of the vegetables, so I have to get to them before she does. But the key for seed saving is you want to really find plants that look not just good to eat, but look nice and healthy so that you can collect those seeds and save them over the winter. So many of our seeds, especially here in the Pacific Northwest, if you don't do proper if you don't do proper management of them, many of them can mold, they can rot. And then when you go to plant things out the next season, you're left with almost nothing. So it's really important when you're out and you're actually doing seed collections that you've got a very structured system to harvest them and actually dry them just a little bit. Now it's kind of a weird little science because you want to make sure that you don't dry them too much, because if you dry them too much, you lose the viability of those seeds. So what I often do with things like my tomatoes is that at the end of the season, I'll go out and I'll pick a few of the ones that are still on the vine. I'll bring them into the house. I'll rinse them just slightly with a little bit of cool water, and then I'll lay them out on a paper towel. But you want to be careful because if you leave them there too long, they'll start sprouting right away. So you want to just dab them, dry them, and then set them out so that air can kind of move around them just a little bit. And then in about a day or two, you'll kind of make sure that they've got just a little bit of pressure still on them. So they're not quite crispy dry, but just a little bit of a soft dryness. And then you're actually going to put those seeds into a little container. And I always add in one extra little piece of a silica gel, actually, which helps pull some of the moisture out of the packages themselves. So what is a silica gel? Well, it's things that, like, when I buy shoes, which some people know me, I like good shoes and I like a lot of shoes. But when I buy shoes, there's usually just a little packet in there that helps keep the moisture down. And so I use those packets and place them into my seed baggies, and that helps keep that extra moisture from causing my seeds to germinate over the winter. So the other thing to do with your seeds is to place them in a space that's also still fairly dry and out of the sun, because all seeds want to grow. So if you keep them in the baggie and you put them in the sunlight, even in the wintertime, they're going to go ahead and sprout for you. So you want to make sure to dry them, put them in the bags, and put them out of the sun. I also do a little method where about once a month, I go through and I check all those seed baggies. My significant other says that I look like a little bit of a seed dealer because I've got all these baggies of seeds that I pull out and I go through and I just check them all for any extra moisture. They then sit out on the countertop for about a day with the bags open so that if there is any extra moisture, that moisture has a chance to kind of escape that baggie before I close it back up for the month and put them away. I tell people I spend a lot of time with my seeds. I end up spending at least one day a month just making sure that everything looks good. And if I happen to find one of the bags that has some seeds that are trying to germinate or that they've gotten moldy, I just go ahead and put those seeds aside and usually get them in the trash. So that way that mold does not get onto any other species in the baggies. Now you'd think that if they're in a baggie, the mold can't move, but mold spores are pretty amazing. They can actually move around pretty easily. So other things that I think about when I think about seed saving is I think about looking at what varieties I have in my own garden. I'm not really a big tomato fan or specific tomato varietal fan, but I do have tomatoes in my garden that have cross-pollinated, and I've saved seeds for the last 5 years from different varieties of tomatoes. I'm kind of one of those folks that I don't necessarily need to have the big beefy tomatoes. Most of my tomatoes, because they've cross-pollinated and they've become their own little hybrids, are usually a moderate-sized tomato. So when people ask me, when I share my seeds with them, what kind of tomatoes I have, I just explain to them, it's a tomato. I don't know exactly what it's going to look like, but I'm just hoping for the best that it will germinate for folks. A couple of other things that I think usually become problematic for seed saving sometimes are things like beets. I try to save my beet seeds, but oftentimes I don't get to them quite soon enough. So they actually end up saving themselves in the tops of my soil. There'll be a few times that I'll come out and I'll get to them just before they've actually dropped their seeds. One of the challenges with so many plants is that they don't all set seeds at the exact same time. So it's really hard to harvest all of those seeds in one fell swoop. So the key is that you have to spend lots of time paying attention to what's happening within your own garden. If you get a chance, it's really fantastic to be able to share the wealth of your garden with others and to actually regain the knowledge that I think is in our soul to plant, to share, and to feed our community. So one of the great things about the fall is that our gardens don't have to quite be put to bed yet. There's still some really great food that we can all enjoy. One of the packages that I received from this program had some chard in there. And so this is actually chard from about 2 years ago. So I've been able to actually eat on this throughout the last 1.5 years. And then I even got to collect some of these seeds this year. So you've got some chard in here. And then, like I said, I'm a messy gardener, so I've got a whole bunch of different fun things in here. I've got some nasturtium, and then if you pan just over there, I've actually got some dahlias. And an interesting thing about dahlias is that folks don't know that those are actually edible tubers. So dahlias are kind of a fun thing to add in for a pop of color, but also if you get desperate enough, you can eat them. The flavors aren't that great, but it is kind of like a potato. There's also a set of just various mixed Asian greens in here too. So I call this my salad bag for the winter time. So these are some tomatoes that are still left on the vine. And yes, it's already November, but they're still fairly healthy. So these would be great candidates to actually come out and pick and use for seed saving. The only thing you want to be really cautious of is make sure that when you're picking them for seed saving, you want to make sure that they don't have these super duper soft spots on them, because what that means is that that's actually already starting to die back. And what can often happen with that is that you can have mold and everything, mold and other funguses kind of take off within the seeds. So that one's not a great one for harvesting, but this is actually a great one for me to leave outdoors for the birds to come and get throughout the winter. So as we think about tomatoes and we think about when is the best time to harvest them to collect seeds, you kind of want to push that timeline a little bit, but you want to make sure that when you look at the actual fruit, that if it's got this really, really soft spot on there, it's probably not going to be the best for your seeds unless you have a really great drying system for your seeds to ensure that they don't start to get moldy and rot.